Purification, Adventist Reflections. Now, to discuss character building ideas, here is your host, Dr. Danzie.
Hi family, welcome back to the Adventist Reflections podcast. Today we have again Pastor Zeny, and we're going to be talking about chapter 8 of the book of Daniel. Zeny, how are you going today again?
Very good. How are you, Dan?
I am well, thank you. I am excited to see that we're progressing along this book, and I have learned so many things from the wisdom that you have shared with us and how the Lord has impressed you to educate us all as we dissect the book of Daniel. So today we're going to be talking about chapter 8, and we were talking behind the scenes how this is going to be. It's a long chapter. There's so many things that we can talk about, just similar to chapter 7.
Yeah.
So we might dissect the chapter in such a way that we make mild justice to it. So perhaps we're going to be dissecting things that won't get into the idea of judgment so deeply, but hey, we will consider doing a special episode on that idea. What do you think, Zeny?
Yeah, so let's leave judgment for our next session, because this chapter is so rich and it has so much in it.
Yeah.
So we will do a better justice to it if we just deal with it separately.
Excellent.
So we can basically deal with the first part of a chapter now and then second part next time, yeah?
All right. So we have here in chapter 8, it says in verse 1 that it's the third year of King Belshazzar's reign. So it's almost as if almost 2 years have gone through since Daniel had the first vision of the 4 beasts coming from the sea.
Yes.
And as we finished the chapter last week, it says that Daniel, he was troubled by it, but he put the things in his heart. So he kind of like remembered them and they were there in his mind. Now he's having another vision again. What's going on in this chapter? What's going on in this new vision?
There's no doubt that there is a connection and there is a link between Daniel 7 and Daniel 8.
Okay.
In chapter 7, verse 27, he would say, I, Daniel. And in chapter 8, he also says, I, Daniel. That's one textual link, if you will, between two chapters.
Okay.
Then you also have the common theme, which covers the same time period. Remember, the major thing and general thing about Daniel is observing that there is this structure of 4, and we never go wrong when we understand that that's the structure.
Right.
That you constantly see. That's in chapter 2.
The 4 metals and the 4 beasts.
Correct. Also, so there's obviously the structure is almost the same, but there are also differences. In chapter 7 is written in Aramaic language.
Okay.
But it's interesting also that chapter 8 is written in Hebrew.
Oh.
This becomes really important later on, and we will realize, because the idea of judgment and the cleansing of a sanctuary is something that is deeply Hebrew reality, Jewish reality.
Right.
Which becomes an antitype of a cosmic judgment, if you will.
So it was purposefully written in that language. It wasn't just like a random thing. Okay.
And actually, from chapter 8 onwards, everything is written in Hebrew.
Oh, okay.
And another difference is, as we know, the animals described in chapter 7 representing different kingdoms that will come as part of human history, they were represented by hybrid animals.
Yes, they were like monsters kind of thing.
But here in chapter 8, kingdoms, not all of them are represented, but just some. So Babylon is not represented, is one thing. Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome are represented, but it's not hybrid animals, but rather normal animals. In fact, we could go further and say these are clean animals. In fact, we could go even further and to say that these animals were sacrificial animals.
Right.
And even more importantly, these animals were being offered in sanctuary during Yom Kippur, or during judgment, or during the cleansing of a sanctuary, which is one and the same thing.
Sure.
So, but we'll come back to that. So that's the major kind of a difference between chapter 7 and chapter 8. So, again, chapter 8 could be divided into two parts. Remember,
Okay.
we looked at chapter 7 and it was divided in three parts.
That's right.
You see those three animals first.
Yep.
And then you see the fourth animal, and a little horn given a lot of space, an explanation. And then the third scene is the scene of the Son of Man,
right,
who comes to the Ancient of Days, but he comes to the Ancient of Days within a context of a judgment.
Yes.
And then now in chapter 8, we have two parts or two sections. The first section is what Daniel sees. And then the second part is what Daniel hears.
Okay, yes.
What Daniel sees were those clean or sacrificial animals. And what he hears is judgment.
Okay.
So,
yes.
So that would be the second part of chapter 8.
Right.
So,
yes.
obviously a lot is happening here. So starting really with the historical part, we find in verse 8, it says, as I was thinking about this, suddenly a goat with a prominent horn between its eyes. Actually, no, we need to start with verse 3 and 4. That's the starting point about what happened historically. I looked up, and there before me was a ram with two horns standing beside the canal. Canal, and the horns were long. One of the horns was longer than the other, but grew up later. I watched the ram as it charged towards the west and the north and the south. No animal could stand against it, and none could rescue from its power. It did as it pleased, and it became great. So Daniel in his vision sees a ram. A ram beside the canal.
Yes.
And it had long horns. And it says one of the horns was longer than the other, but grew up later. So all these details obviously are really important.
Yes.
And this horn was charging towards the west and the north and the south. In other words, it was charging towards three parts, or three directions.
So he's coming from the east.
Yes.
Okay.
And it says it became great. Correct. So once again, previous chapters help us. And the same themes are covered. And so who is this ram? It had two horns, one bigger than the other. It is none other but Persia and Media.
Right, the kingdom that had two main heads.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. So Persia became bigger, even though it was smaller in the beginning, but it grows and becomes bigger than Media. So Media was more dominant in the first part of the reign, but in the second part of the reign, Persia became bigger, and obviously it is depicted in this explanation about ram.
Yeah.
And as we have seen previously in previous chapter 7, remember that the bear, an animal that looked like a bear, was sitting more on one
side than the other.
Yeah.
Yes.
And also, the horns were pointing towards west, north, and south.
Okay.
And westwards was towards Egypt. Northwards it was towards Lydia, and southwards it was towards Babylon.
Okay.
And in previous chapter we had this bear that had three what do you call them? Three
The three
bones.
ribs, the three ribs that he was crushing in his mouth.
That was crushing. So it's the same thing. It represented Egypt, Lydia, and Babylon.
Yes.
So this one is more a conquest in which direction it was going.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one was more of a bloodshed that happened, if you will.
So it's almost as if in this chapter 8, it's the same. There are a lot of, it's the same thing. So it's parallel to the other chapter. And yet there is a little bit more detail here, perhaps like a repetition of the other prophecy, but expanding it a little bit.
Yes,
okay.
Correct. But what I'm always fascinated, just to have a little bit of a intermezzo, a bit of a break on this one, is that I'm fascinated by God who uses metaphors in such a rich and powerful way, and the details of those of the picture that you see are so rich and yet so precise, you know.
Absolutely.
When you think what happened in chapter 2, you have this statue with four different metals.
Yes.
What a simple yet profound way to describe the history from the 6th century BC all the way to the very end. Simple, yet very, very profound. And God does the same now. But it's interesting that he's portraying it with animals, and once again described in details where every details plays its important part that find its parallel to real life situations, you know. So it's quite powerful. The same thing would happen later on in the book of Revelation, you know, exactly the same pictures.
Yes.
And Jesus was also master of portraying pictures, you know, and saying, you know, the kingdom of God is like a man who sows a seed, you know, and so pictures are powerful because they portray a profound truth, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Wow.
So, so that's about ram, representing Medo-Persian kingdom.
And then we have the goat.
And then we have a goat in chapter from verse 5.
Yes.
And it says, as I was thinking about this, suddenly a goat with a prominent horn between its eyes came from the west, crossing the whole earth without touching the ground. So obviously it's speedy, isn't it?
Yeah.
It came towards the two-horned ram, and I had seen standing beside the canal and charged at it in great rage. So obviously there's this clash happening in suspense of heaven, if you will.
Right.
I saw it attack the ram furiously, striking the ram and shattering its two horns. I mean, what a description, isn't it?
Yeah.
What a description. The ram was powerless to stand against it. The goat knocked it to the ground and trampled on it, and none could rescue the ram from its power. The goat became very great. But at its height of its power, the large horn was broken off, and in its place, 4 prominent horns grew up towards the 4 winds of heaven. Wow. Well, I mean, it's simple yet powerful, yet you know,
very descriptive.
Very descriptive. Yet it corresponds to the reality of a clash between 2 empires, if you will, which is the empire of Medo-Persia and Greece.
Yes.
You have Greece, as we saw last time.
That was the leopard, wasn't it? The leopard.
Very quickly.
Yes, the one that had the wings. Yes.
Yeah. It had wings, and it says here that it was crossing the whole earth without touching the ground. So you have a sense of it almost flying.
Yeah, he was speeding through his conquest. Okay.
And attack the ram furiously. So this is obviously a battle between Medo-Persia and Greece, and it literally happened. And what it is saying that this goat-like power or goat-like kingdom had a prominent horn.
Alexander the Great?
Yeah, obviously. So everybody, you can't miss it, can you?
The first king. You know? Yeah, it's very obvious when you see the history for sure.
When when we talk about ancient Greece, and the formation of ancient Greece, you can't just escape the reality of the mighty Alexander the Great, can you?
No, it's just an icon figure that was classified as the first, and the way he conquered, he was very swift and he was powerful,
like nothing that was experienced before.
Yeah.
Greece conquered the world.
So this is the guy who fell. This is that one horn that comes from this goat.
That's right. That's
Okay.
right. And then after that, it says that this prominent horn was broken off.
Right.
And what the history tells us, that at a very young age, he became the ruler and the emperor or the king of the world. Very quickly came to prominence. But also very quickly he faded away. He died.
Right.
He died. So the sudden death of Alexander the Great brought about 4 generals that succeeded him. So there was not a single leader that succeeded him, but 4 generals.
I'm assuming they divided the kingdom in 4 regions.
Correct. And that's exactly how it is described here. The god became very great, but at the height of its power, the large horn was broken off. What a truthful description of exactly what happened.
Absolutely.
At the height of its power, suddenly Alexander the Great dies.
It was unexpected. Like if somebody would have predicted it, nobody would say, no, this won't happen. He's too young. Nobody counted with his health issues.
And it says, in its place, 4 prominent horns grew up.
Yes.
How else would you describe the rise of these 4 generals? So it's not a single leader who succeeds him, but 4 generals.
Which are the 4 heads describing that leopard in Daniel 7, I suppose.
Correct. Exactly right.
So beautiful.
So how beautiful is that?
Absolutely.
How beautiful is that? I mean, when you read the history, you find it clearly, but when you read God's history, you also find it quite amazing and astonishing, isn't it?
Yeah. No doubt.
And this is being predicted much, much before than this was going to take place. This was predicted in the 6th century, and we are talking about centuries later that this is going to happen. What a powerful God of heaven.
Absolutely.
Who does this, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And he give us these messages so that we are aware and be ready.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So that's why studying the book of Daniel becomes quite fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense when you are dissecting the chapters and the verses, and it brings us hope. Yeah.
Yes.
So these generals esparse themselves, like they go around the 4 directions of the winds, around north, south, west, east.
Yes, they basically divide a kingdom. And that becomes the history of Greek Empire.
And that is when the other
moving on with the text. Then it says from verse 9 to 12, out of one of them came another horn, which started small but grew in power to the south and to the east and toward the beautiful land.
Right.
It grew until it reached the host of heaven.
Yes.
Or heavens.
Yes.
And it threw some of the starry host down to the earth and trampled on them. It set itself up to be as great as the commander of the army of the Lord. It took away the daily sacrifice from the Lord, and his sanctuary was thrown down. Because of rebellion, the Lord's people and the daily sacrifice were given over to it. It prospered in everything it did, and truth was thrown to the ground.
Right.
Wow, what a description! So obviously, what we could see parallelism so far with Medo-Persia and with Greece from chapter 7 and chapter 8. So we are to expect in the same way parallelism from chapter 7 and chapter 8 in what follows.
Right.
So what followed in chapter 7 after the 2 hybrid animals, which represented Medo-Persia and Greece, was the kingdom of Rome.
It
And
came
even
that
more specifically, a little horn power.
right. So it was that beast that was no name. It didn't resemble anything. It was like no other.
Exactly.
And now this one doesn't come from an animal. This little horn in chapter 8.
Exactly. So in chapter 7, we encounter a little horn. But here we encounter also, it says, another horn. And obviously it would refer to a little horn power.
Yeah.
Because it set itself up against God, and we saw that in chapter 7. And it does the same here. It sets itself up against God.
It is interesting.
It works against the people of God in chapter 7, and it does the same against the people of God in chapter 8.
Right.
And so there is no doubt, and there should be no doubt that this refers to the same power, which is really little horn power, or papacy, if you will.
Yes. Okay.
So in other words, in chapter 7 it has the same name. In chapter 8 it is the same name, a little horn.
Yes.
In chapter 7 it is arrogant, it is very intelligent. In chapter 8 it is arrogant, it is intelligent. It works against God in chapter 7, it works against God in chapter 8.
And against the saints.
Exactly. Takes on itself attributes of God in chapter 7. And does the same in chapter 8. It takes daily sacrifice from a prince.
So he's taking it away. This
exactly. So something is happening with this little horn power or papacy, that it takes prerogatives of God upon itself. And when you think about it, that's exactly what happened. So much power is invested in priests that they can mediate between people and God,
Right.
And when they receive Eucharist, by just saying a Latin word, they turn this Eucharist into literal blood and the body of Jesus. That's incredible power, that they believe that they have. And therefore they sway power onto people because they are distributors of the salvation,
So they're doing the work that only God can do.
Only God can do,
Yeah. So it reminds me on that idea.
They have a contempt for the law of God, because it says in chapter 7 that it changes the law of God, attempts to change the law of God, and also in chapter 8 it says that the truth was thrown onto the ground.
Yes.
So it's kind of the same thing. It persecutes the saints in chapter 7. And exactly the same thing in chapter 8. And it in chapter 7 it is the most important power until the very end of time. And in chapter 8 it's also the most important power until the end of time. So it is really talking about one and the same power, which is religious power of Roman Catholic Church, headed by papacy. That started very early in a Christian church, and it will go all the way until the end.
And I'm assuming, being that it's the same thing, it is also here that we see that long period of time that we have got to know as the Dark Ages, when people were living in darkness spiritually, because they were seeking for man-made systems of false religion, forgiveness and abstinence.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So we have all these parallelisms, and we didn't even go into, but we already did that in chapter 7 when we talk about the parallels between chapter 2 and chapter 7. But we can see also these parallels between chapter 2, 7, and 8. Can't we?
That's right.
Yeah.
There's one thing where many who look at this chapter, some students of the Bible would say, "Hey, why do we see this little horn power as part of the fourth kingdom rather than the third kingdom, because it says that out of them arose this little horn, and they point out that out of them could be these four horns, or four generals, if you will.
Yeah.
So they say this should be regarded as part of Greece rather than Rome.
Okay.
And
Yes.
then many of them would point out to this being Antiochus Epiphanes, who was within Greek period, and who did some damage literally to the people of God, but in no way so significant as is described in chapter 7.
And we cannot separate it. I mean, once we see the parallels in the previous kingdom, it just makes prophetic sense. It makes a scholarly sense to continue from where we left it in chapter 7, to continue here, just giving a bit more detail and expanding onto.
Yeah, exactly. But another point is, how can also a horn rise up from another horn?
Right. Okay.
So obviously it cannot rise from another horn. So what is this out of one of them is a question, So this little horn rose out of them, and the Hebrew word is ahat mehem.
Okay.
Out of is feminine, and of them is masculine. And this expression is connected with the previous expression, which has identical order, which is four winds, which is feminine, and heaven is masculine. So really, this little horn power kind of comes out of wind. And the wind that is described there is the wind of war, because later on comes this fourth kingdom, or Roman power, and out of this Roman Empire rises this little horn power. So that's really explanation. Then in that case, we stay faithful to the parallelism between chapter 7 and chapter 8.
And I guess it makes sense when you think about it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding in that these writings wouldn't have been broken down into verses the way we do it now. So it would have been a continuous sentence. And when we read that verse 8, talking about at the end of the verse 8, in place of it, four notable ones came up towards the four winds of heaven. And then it continues, and out of one of them, we could really argue what you're saying there, that it's talking out of the four winds, and not necessarily that it was necessarily within the Greek Empire.
The question obviously is, why don't we have the representation given more clearly and, let's say, introduce another animal?
Okay, sure, yeah. It's a fair enough question.
And the reason for it is something that we are going to talk about next time, which is to do with the judgment.
Yes.
Because the ram and goat were the two animals which were being offered during the Yom Kippur.
Right, the expiation.
During the judgment. So in other words, besides describing the reality of the succession of kingdoms, by depicting these two animals, there is a bigger reality happening here, which is the depiction also of a judgment, where these two animals play the major role.
Yes.
So introducing a third animal would not really work well.
No,
you get my
can
point?
see that. Yes, absolutely. I think it will be clear next week, but I see your point, and this is exciting because there is so much that the Bible student can dig, and then you have something else, and like you mentioned before, there's a beautiful thing in the parallelisms and the meanings in a system that no human intelligence could have created when you follow the rationale.
Yes, exactly right. Exactly right.
And also, this is one of the blessings, again, we might expand that next week, but this is one of the blessings in terms of this message as we saw and understood where at large the Seventh-day Adventist Church was founded.
Yes.
Okay.
For now, that's the first part of a chapter. The next one becomes really, really interesting when we look at the idea of judgment or the cleansing of a sanctuary.
Excellent. Well, I'm excited and I'm looking forward to that episode as well. So I hope that everybody else is too. It's beautiful to see in the parallelisms and the specific detail that points back to that history. And we can see that now in a backwards view, although if we see, as Zeny explained, this was given before this happened. Remember, this was given around the time when Babylon was on. And the reality is we're living in that fourth beast. We're living in that little horn time. And the next thing is Jesus Christ.
Yes.
When he will come and deliver the saints. And that's the hope, the beautiful hope that Christians live with.
Yeah. Definitely.
Well, I hope everybody enjoyed this episode, and we look forward to having you again next week when we're going to talk about judgment. We'll talk about those 2,300 days. What do they mean? Why they're there? And why is it important for you and I? More so, what can we do with that knowledge and how we can share with somebody else? So I hope that you come back next week and listen to that episode. Until then, I hope that you are having a good time, a good Sabbath, and a good period studying the book of Daniel. Today we choose to love God. How about you?
Remember to subscribe to this podcast, like it, share it, hashtag it, comment, and find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, and Tumblr as Adventist Reflections. God bless you.